Hello there, and a very warm welcome to the first in our series of webcast interviews with the leaders of Scotland's political parties as we move into the Scottish Conference season. For this one, I'm delighted to be joined by Johann Lamont, the elected leader of the Scottish Labour Party. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. The first, I think, opportunity we've had to do this. Let's go to some individual policy questions first. One from George Anderson. Thanks to everyone who's put in questions. Really grateful. George Anderson says, what is your intention on retaining or ending free university education in Scotland? He's interested in your policies on tuition fees, basically.
Can I just make the basic point, first of all, that having been defeated in the last election, we want to look across the range of our policies, and it would be fair to say that we were going into a process where we're refreshing our policies, and so a lot of these things, nothing sacrosanct, I said everything, nothing's off the table. I would say that I'm concerned about the First Minister's characterisation of his policy. He says, the rocks will melt before we end free education in Scotland. I was a teacher for 20 years. I know the disadvantages that some young people face. For an awful lot of people, there is no access to free education, and I think that should be the test. I am concerned too about the SNP's position of cutting further education by 20%, and it means that those young people and older people doing higher education courses in further education colleges are at disadvantage. We don't want to have financial blocks to people going to university. We want equality of opportunity, but we also have to look at access issues. So my key position in this is we don't want upfront tuition fees. We want to,
do you rule that out completely?
We don't want people to be deterred from going to university to achieving. However, it's complacent to say that the current position we've got represents free education. It does not.
Would that mean that possibly there might have to be a graduate contribution to fund universities warning about the gap in provision in Scotland between Scotland and
Well, I think we have to respond both to what the universities and colleges are saying. We also have to respond to the issue of hardship amongst students and the deterrent impact of that. And it does seem to me that it's almost beyond party, because we have to test it against a number of factors, and I do place access to higher education as a very important one. If we were establishing that for those who can go to university, they don't pay tuition fees, but at the same time our figures on access and mobility through higher education is reducing, that's a challenge for all of us across political parties.
And that might have to mean a graduate contribution from those who can afford to pay.
Well, what I've said is we need to look at the sustainability of the position we've got. Ideally, you would have free education for all. We're not in a place where we have that currently. We have seen colleges under the caution at a level at a time of economic challenge that must be unacceptable. So what we need is a mature debate around actually what the different alternatives are.
Just to be absolutely clear, that might have to mean graduate contribution.
It might have to. But we look at this in the interest of students and achieving potential and access.
Now, a very different topic comes from Stuart Glendinning. Thanks for your question. Stuart, Trident. Clarify your stance on the UK's nuclear deterrent, and particularly, of course, Trident based at Faslane.
Well, I'm interested in what the coalition government have said about the recommissioning of Trident. They seem to have put that on pause. I support the party's position on multilateral nuclear disarmament, and we need to work across the world for global peace. We accept that. I'm keen to be in dialogue with all of those across the spectrum in the reviews round on the nuclear question. But I do think that the question is not really about whether it's sited on this side of the border or on the other side of the border, but how we can over time ensure that we have multinational nuclear disarmament.
What about defence policy more generally, a big issue when it comes to the Constitution as well?
Well, it is a big issue. I mean, the interesting thing for those who would argue about the position of Trident, we have to recognise the creation of jobs within the local economy, highly skilled jobs, the impact on those communities where, for example, Trident is cited, and more broadly, defence jobs themselves are significant. And we do want, I think, over the next period, when we're discussing the referendum, debating the future of Scotland, begin to understand how do we defend our country through the partnership with the rest of the United Kingdom, and actually what the economic consequence would be of that separation too.
Jumping on to another topic, forgive me for this, a very eclectic mix, it's the nature of this programme. Bill Loneski, forgive me if I've got your name wrong, from Lauder. He's referring to the fact the ScotRail franchise lasts until 2014, it was extended for a further 3 years. He asked if you have any plans at that point to return it to public ownership. Would that be feasible?
Well, one of the things that we said in our own manifesto, which the tragedy of our manifesto was probably nobody read it and recognised there were interesting policies there, that we would look at the franchise when it was coming up. And one of the options at that stage is to mutualise the railways, which wouldn't necessarily to go back into public ownership, but some kind of cooperative or mutual model. Again, our minds are open in that. The test is value for money to the public purse, the quality of the services that people get, and the cost of travel.
Let's move to another transport one. Julie Arnott from Dunfermline. The M74, she's a bit upset by the M74, wonders whether shaving a few minutes off a journey into Glasgow is worth blighting the environment and potentially the health of those living next to the M74 extension. Perhaps generally on road projects, but that one in particular.
Well, I accepted the need for the M74 in a view that would actually take traffic off some of the roads around the south side.
Isn't it? Yes.
And I have to confess an individual benefit from the M74 that when I travelled when Tollcross swimming pool was still open to take my son there in the morning, it shaved it by 15 minutes, which is quite significant at 5 o'clock in the morning. I think it has created, and we'd hope it would continue to create economic opportunity. But beside that, we do have to have the broader debate about how do we encourage people onto public transport, how do we make public transport accessible to people. And one of the reasons why the recent debate around the plans for closure of railway stations in Glasgow and beyond that was so critical was because people recognised that if you haven't got access to reliable transport, people are more likely to go back into their cars, or for those who don't have cars, it can have a huge economic impact for them.
Where are you on public transport generally then? Perhaps re-regulation of bus provision?
Yes, well, certainly in a constituency like mine, I was very struck when one of the bus companies was proposing changes to its timetable. The emails I got were not, oh, this is a bit unfortunate. It was somebody saying, for example, I'll not be able to get to my work in time. Mm-hmm. And I won't be able to get to my work in time. I can't afford to go by taxi. I won't be able to work. And I think we have to understand that for some in our communities, the transport services are the underpinning of their capacity to actually go out and take the jobs that are available to them. So we are looking at re-regulation of the buses in that regard.
Still on the economy, a very wide-ranging question from Matthew, is it Gundry, forgive me, from East Kilbride. He's talking about the various agencies that there are, Skills Development Scotland, etc. He says he refuses to give up, he's trying hard to get employment, but he says he finds that these agencies fudge the results of their work, and actually the unemployment picture, I'm basically summing up a very long question, the unemployment picture is worse than that. It's not just youth unemployment, he says, it's unemployment generally.
No, I agree with that. I think there's a particular challenge around youth unemployment because those of us who lived through the 80s remember what it actually meant for young people in particular, and I was a school teacher at that time.
And you have stressed youth unemployment very vigorously week after week.
Because it is about, if you fail to get into work in your early years, what does that then mean going forward for the rest of your life? And it can have a huge impact, not just on individuals, but families and communities. So it is serious. But that is not to misrepresent the significance of unemployment amongst others. I am a bit concerned that some of the work has been done through the colleges by the Minister to focus entirely on 16 to 19-year-olds does have a consequence for people who have lost their jobs and want to retrain, and does have a consequence for other groups, for example, people with learning disabilities, learning skills for living. So there is a huge challenge around this, and I think really in terms of government, the test for any government is to move beyond finessing the figures to give the best message possible, but actually to focus on these are individuals, like your questioner, with individual concerns. And it ought not to be the case that the energy of any organisation involved in this is about proving that they're doing a good job. The test is whether we're responding to what individuals are telling us about their experience.
Do you accept Alex Salmon's point that he makes regularly in rebuttal to your arguments about youth unemployment, that the basic levers that you are calling to be altered actually reside in Westminster hands?
Well, I accept that the economic context created by the coalition government is a bad one. We have said that they're cutting too far, too fast. They're damaging recovery. But at the same time, at the First Minister's own hand, there are choices he's making. Now, for example, 8 to 9% of the cuts that have been made within local government. That, therefore, has a huge impact, particularly on women who are disproportionately employed in local government, disproportionately employed in low-paid jobs. Equally, the First Minister himself said he had a Plan McBee, which was to bring forward capital spending to stimulate economic growth and create jobs. When he brings forward the capital to build the Forth Road Bridge, he creates the contract in such a way that Scottish firms have not got access to it.
No,
so we've not got...
He is adamant that is not the case, that it had to be fairly open. And for example, on the steel provision, it wasn't feasible to find.
No, he had £1.5 billion contract, £20 million of it have gone to local companies. There are things that you can do in government to create economic growth, stimulate the economy when you've got that. He himself argued that was what the purpose of bringing capital spending forward was.
Surely it's not feasible that an SNP minister would be diverting jobs away from Scotland if it were possible. Alec Neil says that their hands were tied by the tendering process, and he is appealing to the UK government to allow local factors to be taken into account.
Which is a default position. With respect, I think if I had that size of a contract to let, I would be writing the letters before I let the contract, and I would be establishing what we can do. And I know at a local level, you can create partnerships, you can create community benefit clauses, you can argue socio-economic impact of the way in which the contract has been created. But there is also, in my understanding, is actually the way in which the contracts were bundled up to make them attractive meant that they couldn't compete. And the reality is that the thing about the Forth Road Bridge, which everybody argued for, was not just that you got the bridge, but you got the economic and social benefit of the construction of the bridge. We have an SNP government who have not willed the means for that to happen.
James Martin hears what you're saying when you make these points, but he says you don't actually say what you would do differently from the Scottish Government about unemployment.
Well, we wouldn't cut the FE sector, clearly. We would not cut housing in the way that they have done, and where we have economic, when we've got the big issue around procurement, public procurement, has to be addressed. How do you use the money that you've got and the opportunity that creates to create jobs?
But if you would restore spending on colleges and housing, where would you find the money to?
Well, we believe there are efficiencies elsewhere. In Jackie Bailey, for example,
you can't just say that early. You've got to have some sort of idea where that cash would come from.
Absolutely, and we would want to. One of their frustrations has been in interrogating the Scottish Government's budget that we were unable to do that, and there's a lack of transparency in the budget itself. I recognise the seriousness of the challenge. I'm not disputing that, but I think we have to test the choices that the Scottish Government are making, and that does mean that you open up the debate about where they're spending money in order to ensure that the focus of your budget is on jobs and growth.
You mentioned housing, and Michael Patterson from Kirkcaldy and Susan McKillop from Dunoon, thanks for your questions, both asking you, will you make building more homes for social rent a priority? Well,
we had a very good record of this in government, and one of the ways in which it is about building these homes, but it's also putting a situation where they are sustainable. So, for example, housing associations and housing cooperatives with an awful lot more control at local level meant that not only did you invest in the housing, but that the housing then were maintained and they didn't kind of go into disrepair, which sadly in the past we have done. Mm-hmm. We recognise the importance of having a safe, warm, comfortable home. Indeed, one of the things I'm very proud of is that in my own city of Glasgow, we ensured there was £1 billion of investment in Glasgow's social rented housing, and as a consequence, at a time when there is recession, one of the few places where work has been done is around building of socially rented houses.
Another couple of questions on policy. Prison visiting committees, question from Gina Placey in West Lothian. She wants to retain them.
Yes, and we agreed. There was a debate recently in the Scottish Parliament, and the Labour Party supported the retention of the visitor committees. We feel that they're a small element, but an important element in ensuring that our prisons are operating in a way that are effective. My own sense is I'm not really quite sure why the Cabinet Secretary has decided to get rid of them. They're not expensive. They afford an opportunity for a bit of close contact with prisoners and a bit of monitoring in quite an informal way, and we would hope that he would reverse that decision.
The next question, thanks for that. The next question comes from Falkirk. I think you can guess what the topic might be. Stephen Morrison from Falkirk wants to know the date for the Falkirk by-election.
Well, that's in the hands of the current MP, Eric Joyce, but can I say that if the reports that we've been given of recent allegations are true, I've made it very clear that I do not regard Eric Joyce as someone who is fit to be a Labour candidate. It is in his hands to decide whether he stands down or not, but we've taken the decision that it's not appropriate for him to be a Labour candidate or a Labour MP.
And that will be a Labour candidate at the next election, but you're saying there perhaps he shouldn't be a Labour MP right now. He's obviously been suspended from the party.
Absolutely.
Do you believe that he should stand down?
Well, I think the allegations, as I've said, that's a matter for him, but I'm very clear he's not now either a Labour candidate or a Labour MP.
How does it make you feel when you see the allegations building against Mr Joyce?
Well, There is a sadness in all of these things, and I can't comment on his individual challenges and problems, but I think the recent reports about what I saw as an abuse of power, we are all in a very privileged position in this job, and that...
these are reports about a relationship with a member of his staff?
Well, of
a
young,
of his team,
of a young girl who was still at school.
Yes.
And I regard that as a breach of trust. We have a very... all of us
he is denying there is an inappropriate relationship.
And I've said if the reports are true, then I find them appalling, and I think that it is unacceptable for that relationship between somebody who does have authority as an elected member, as a candidate, in relation to those who come to help him. And I think anyone who has children of that age or grandchildren of that age will probably feel the same as I do.
Should he quit?
I think he should.
It's gone too far.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me turn to you to generally on party matters. A couple of questions on the William Kerr from West Lothian suggesting the party a bit disconnected. Mary Taylor from Inverkeithing want Labour to formulate and publicise a campaign about alternatives to an independent Scotland. Very disparate questions,
yes,
but there's a common theme between them, which is the party Labour Party requiring to re-engage. What went wrong in the election campaign? Big question.
Huge question, and made all the huger, if that's such a word, all the more serious by the fact that in general terms we didn't see it coming. People have said that in the last election we were complacent. I think we were cautious, and our caution came from a feeling that power was very close, and the opportunity that power would give us to make a difference to people's lives was just beyond reach. Mm-hmm. I think the review has established this. My own reflections on this are that people didn't believe what we were saying. They didn't believe we were listening to them. We didn't believe that our primary purpose was to stand up for them. We are now in a place where we absolutely are committed to putting Scotland first, that our role is to argue for and articulate Labour values, which I believe are very closely in relation to Scottish values about cooperation, about sharing. If you've got a strong economy, how do we create shared prosperity? How do we address the questions that too many of our young people's futures are determined by the time they're 3? These are the things that motivate me. That disconnection means that we have to listen and learn from people, and we engage and we open ourselves up to speaking to people, learning from them, but also saying, actually, here's the thing, we have a distinctive message for the people of Scotland. We believe in this strongly. We believe we can have a fairer society with a strong economy, as I've said, and that we have to, again, I suppose the challenge for us is both to have the humility to recognise the scale of the defeat, what caused that, but also not a council of despair where we sit back and indulge ourselves when we know there are so many huge political arguments that we need to engage with in the coming period.
Do you think, I mean, you're speaking at the party conference this weekend, you'll be signalling the need for change. Do you think the change required is what? Candidate selection, organisation, what? The way the party is formulated?
It's all of these things.
Yes.
It's the focus and the purpose of us being, why do we want power? What do we want to do? What is our vision for Scotland and the United Kingdom and the world? What do we believe in? We're not finessing our position. We're not finding a narrative. I think we have to find a way of telling our story about what our Scotland could look like. But that is also about understanding. The fine words are there. You need the organisational changes to make that happen. We need an electoral machinery that's fit for purpose and is not telling us things that were completely entirely wrong. And we need to the extent to which I think people feel a cynicism about politics. We need to be part of coming back in that. This is not about being cynical or self-serving. It is about being part of a debate about how we create a better society.
Just among the umpteen questions that folks sent in, and again, thanks for all the questions that came in the dozens and hundreds. You'll not be surprised to learn that many of them are on the constitutional question, independence, Devo Max, Devo Plus, whatever formulation. Let's just try a few of those now. First of all, a particular issue. Do you agree with Alex Salmond's plans to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in the referendum? That's from Samuel Theodorides.
Well, these are one of the things that are going out into the consultation.
Yes.
Our party's position has been that we would look at extending the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds. Our view is if you're going to do that, it should be for all elections, and it needs to be done in a proper way, in an effective way.
Why don't you just start with the referendum? Why not start with that? If it's good in principle, why not do it in practice for the referendum?
Well, we said it felt right in principle, although of course there are people who disagree with that because there's a huge question about the level of apathy and disinterest and disengagement with people who are over 18. So I think even participation in itself is not actually about age and stage. There'll be some 16 and 17-year-olds who will be very engaged, and many, like their counterparts up to 25 and beyond, who are not. So it's not a silver bullet round engagement. My own view is that we need to look at it, interrogate it. How do you make it real for all elections? And of course, beside that is a parallel argument about the franchise being proposed by the First Minister, which actually does perhaps exclude people who are not living in Scotland currently, who may be not living in Scotland because they couldn't get work in Scotland. So there is a debate around the franchise. And
yes,
I think
but if you extend the franchise, you have to abandon the Hollywood franchise, which is the one Mr. Salmon is not making up a franchise, he's using the one laid down in statute in
yes,
in
and I think
Scotland
what he's
Act.
proposing around 16 and 17-year-olds is not actually to extend
laid down by Labour in the Scotland Act.
It's not actually about extending the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds.
No,
it's
extending
it to 16 and 17-year-olds who've got themselves on ahead of being 18.
That's right.
So there's a bit of randomness about that as well, which I'm more than happy in our cross-party talks
to look at.
with the First Minister. We need to look at that, but it needs to be fair and people need to sign up for that.
Another thing, Ross Chesla, forgive me again if the name is wrong, why do you refuse to allow a third option, basically a status quo independence and a third option of maybe Devo Max or enhanced devolution? Why you keep it? Why do you want that kept off the ballot paper?
You've also said there's Devo Plus. There's it's not just a third option. There's a whole series of options
well,
around devolution. It's very difficult.
Why doesn't Labour define one?
Well, it's very difficult to see how you would define any of these onto the ballot paper ahead of any of the others. But can I make the more serious point? People say, and First Minister himself says, that they want a decisive decision on the question: do we want to remain a part of the United Kingdom, or do we wish to separate? Do we want to leave the United Kingdom? That's the fundamentally biggest decision that people of Scotland have to make. Do we break up a partnership that's existed for 300 years? That has to be clear, and the outcome has to be clear. The process is important in order that everybody accepts the result. But what is unacceptable is for the First Minister to try and paint those of us who wish to stay inside the United Kingdom as being conservative on the constitutional question. Labour drove the debate on devolution. Labour got into power, and within 2 years the Scottish Parliament was up and running. And we have always been clear that in relation to powers, it's what works in the best interest of the people of Scotland. That's a debate about how you sustain and make the United Kingdom stronger. It is not about, do you want to stay inside the United Kingdom or not? We need clarity on whether we stay in the United Kingdom or not. And that's why that one question is so important. But that is not to say, therefore, what they're voting. If people say, yes, I want to stay in the United Kingdom, it is as is and forevermore. Devolution has already changed significantly. My view is that it could and probably should change again, but that is a separate
you're
debate.
willing to consider more powers, including perhaps more tax powers, beyond the current Scotland Bill?
Yes, I have said already that nothing is off the table in relation to that debate. My test is, how does it best serve the interests of the people of Scotland, the strength of the economy and the opportunity for social justice and a challenge in inequality? It's not a virility symbol for me, but where powers lie, it must be in Holyrood, because that makes Holyrood a strong institution. All institutions are about serving the people of Scotland, and I want the debate about what makes sense to remain at United Kingdom level, what should be at a Scottish level, but actually how beyond that do we liberate and access the voices within our communities who want to shape local decision making, and I think that is part of that longer term process.
We now have a specific proposal being advanced by a grouping headed by Jeremy Purvis. Duncan McNeill from the Labour Party is there as a member of that scrutiny team. Now their proposal is Devo Plus, which is transferring welfare benefits except pensions to Scotland and having control of all income tax and all corporation tax, with the power to vary those and possibly compete, bring about tax competition. That's the original proposal, which will now be scrutinised by this group. What do you make of that? Are you attracted to that ideologically as an idea?
Well,
or concerned?
I'm happy, delighted, pleased that we interrogate all of these options. I would find it very difficult to be persuaded on the benefits of tax competition, given my view that the strength of the United Kingdom is this cooperation partnership, particularly in times of economic challenge, and we see the kind of sense of powerlessness we have when we look at what's happening in the Eurozone. Why would it be a good idea for us to devolve corporation tax, to cut it, so we get into competition with the City of London? Do we end up in a place where we have a race to the bottom and what economists call wasteful competition? There is no benefit to that competition except to those big businesses who don't want to pay corporation tax at all. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make much sense to me. What I've said is I want these options interrogated.
How about income tax? Would again the idea that Scotland could undercut the rest of the UK on income tax be a bit of a dodgy one for you?
Well, and people have talked about it in terms of increasing income tax in order to fund benefits. But somebody put it to me, there's a kind of and this is the real world that we have to relate to in relation to how people behave in relation to these decisions. That actually a finance minister in a Scottish government with very significant tax varying powers would cut for upper levels of taxation, because you would then see people coming across the border to get a benefit from it. Does that mean that overall the income tax takes across the United Kingdom is reducing? Is that a good thing? We need to. These are things
on
that
balance,
we need to look at.
it sounds like you'd rather leave alone on tax generally.
Well,
just have uniformity across the UK in order to bring about the social cohesion that you're talking about, the redistribution.
Well, it's social cohesion and preventing a circumstance where you create unnecessary and wasteful competition.
Okay.
But I have said, and I recognise a lot of work being done on this, that you need to look at the evidence and test that against some of maybe more scaremongering suggestions that people would abuse the system.
William Cruikshank, Jonathan Austin, both roughly the same question. Why are you against independence? What's wrong with it?
I'm in favour of the cooperation and partnership that the United Kingdom creates. I think a bit of me finds identity politics difficult. The big things that drive me, the things that concern me, I don't believe that child poverty and inequality were created by the decision 300 years ago to go into the United Kingdom. I don't believe that if we change our constitutional arrangements in the rest of the United Kingdom, that scar about life chances and opportunities will be addressed. I think it's a false question and a false premise. I find that frustrating. I think the bigger political challenge is actually how do you create economic circumstances and a focus in government on addressing inequality. And for me, that is something that is more likely to happen in the United Kingdom. I see it as a redistributive model, that money is coming out of the richest bits of the United Kingdom and can be distributed across the whole of the United Kingdom. My concern about children living in poverty doesn't stop at the border.
And yet Ian Shepherd points out that he's asking, do you think Ireland would be better off as part of the UK or Luxembourg as part of Germany? But basically translating it, saying those countries that have independence don't tend to surrender it.
Well, there's an interesting kind of conflation of ideas here about who we're treating against. I mean, I do think the First Minister rather likes the idea of perceived as being a liberator of Scotland and that we're oppressed by the English or the United Kingdom. I just simply think that is not the case. The countries that moved away from the United Kingdom and chose independence had a colonial relationship with the United Kingdom, and that was an empire in which we actively, as Scots, engaged, as opposed to in the other direction. So I just think that my sense is the United Kingdom is a partnership. There are strong family ties. There are very rational and logical economic benefits from it, and it's on that basis. But please do not think that I believe that Scotland isn't strong enough or whatever to make that choice.
Scotland could be independent.
Of course it could be. It's a matter of people of Scotland to decide.
Yes.
And I indeed said in my own leadership contest that should that decision be made on a clear basis and we separate off, that the politics of equality and social justice will remain to be fought and won.
Malcolm Osborne from Buntyland making the point in that when it comes to a referendum, if you haven't put in a Devo Max or Devo Plus option, you know what independence is for, you know what a yes vote brings. He says you wouldn't know in those circumstances what a no vote means because you guys have all deferred that option till after the referendum.
Well, two things there. First of all, we don't know what independence means. We absolutely do not know what independence means. The First Minister asserts both that it is
it's a bit clearer than
it's this huge and massive step and a huge and massive change. On the other hand, there is no risk and there is no change, and we'd be in the monetary union.
Control of tax and spending, it means membership of the European Union and membership of the United Nations. How would that do?
He asserts. But actually he even says, well, we'll be in a monetary union with the rest of the United Kingdom, but that relationship would be a very different one than if we were part of the United Kingdom. And I agree that we should set out our vision for how Scotland can change and its relationship inside the United Kingdom should change. That debate is not on pause. You can't stop. That debate is ongoing. There's a separate argument about whether that should then be on the ballot paper. All of the main parties say we want one question because we want to decide, for those who have fought for Scotland to become a separate country for the last, Alec Salmon's case, for 40 years, he wants that clarity too. We need to have that clarity, and then we make that decision and we deal with the consequences as they are found.
Final question, you mentioned Alex Salmond. How do you regard him as a human being, as a man?
Well, I don't have any... I mean, to some extent, I don't have any. He has never been anything other than entirely civil and friendly when I've met him personally. I
But
enjoy...
he's just a political opponent, yeah.
I enjoy the political argument. I'm frustrated and disappointed by the political prospectus that he presents to people of Scotland, which explains the real challenges in terms that I don't agree. I fundamentally disagree with him on the question of his vision for the future of Scotland, but that's what it is.
And
It's
you think the
nothing
Union
more.
will win the referendum in those circumstances?
I believe the strongest case can be made for Scotland staying strong in partnership and cooperation with the rest of the United Kingdom. We need to go on to that argument, make that case, and it's for the people of Scotland to be confident of what the options are and then to make their decision.
Johann Lamont, thank you very much indeed for joining me and for taking the questions from our listeners, viewers and readers. Thanks to you who wrote in with questions. That's the first of our webcasts. From me, Brian Taylor. Toodaloo-the-doo.